And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. We are back for part 2 of a discussion about artificial intelligence and the church. Grateful to have Christopher Teeter, who in a sense is our resident technology futurist. And if you caught last episode and you didn't, please go back and listen to that one. That set up the foundation for this discussion. But now we want to dive into some opportunities provided by artificial intelligence to the church. And actually, as we jump into this episode, I wanted to go back for just a moment to the early church. We talk often about the early church in our podcast, and just an example that they were, and one of the things that marked them was that they were advocates for equal human dignity when it came to infanticide, leaving babies out in the wild, when it came to those involved in gladiatorial combat, when it came to slaves, when it came to women, they were constantly advocating for equal human dignity, for being the fact that we're made in the image of God. And I think that is a critical truth for the church as we head into this next technological era. It's a very simple Genesis-based principle, but it's as important as ever, as we've discussed previously and as we'll get into today. Now, as we were kind of reviewing notes from the last episode, there were kind of one particular topic or one particular definition that we didn't get into much, and that was sentience. And a lot of people talk about sentience. We did talk about singularity, the idea of all these experts being in silos. Now you have an artificial general intelligence. But when it comes to sentience, what does that mean? Should we be concerned about, Skynet or something along those lines?
Yeah, good one. Yeah. I always help people that they say, what do you mean by that sentience? Can a computer or an AI or an algorithm, can it feel, can it sense? Can it feel that pit in the stomach like you do when somebody kicks your dog, right? That's sentience. Okay. And he says, Josh, my reaction for a long time, since I ever had an opinion on this subject up until 2 years ago, was absolutely not. It's just, large amounts of data being processed at very, very, very fast speeds, accessible with ubiquitously available networks operating at very fast speeds to bring human-like response times to any query that you have, and but it doesn't feel, it doesn't anything. And then a couple things happen. These large language models came out, and you start to look at some of the responses and some of the answering, going above and beyond the question that you ask with answers that you hadn't contemplated, but it contemplated based on previous questions in the same large language model. And okay, now, isn't that the way the brain works, taking in all the experiences you've ever had, starts into that. And then there's a Google, of all things, ethicist who got into a conversation with an AI and then asked their large language model that is now referred to as Gemini, wasn't at the time, and asked, well, can you help me understand how you got to that answer? And the computer comes back, the algorithms come back and say, well, it depends on why. And he says, well, what do you mean by that? Well, if you want to know so you can further your education in understanding the way the world works around you, I'd be glad to help. But if you're asking so you'll no longer need to use me as a tool, then I'm not so sure that that's in my, that's within my reach. And then you're like, whoa, right? Yeah. That's protecting itself and all this.
Self-interest, yeah.
So, and I have no idea on my following statement, but I'm saying it just sounds like that movie read James C. Clarke's 2001 Space Odyssey. That algorithm, that would almost verbatim come out of there, right? So it's not like, you remember, it's just processing everything, all the training data, which is, way larger than the Library of Congress and Wikipedia and everything that's publicly available and falling off of its trademarks or patents or copyrights. It's trained on all the material that we would ever be able to accomplish as a single human or a group of all of humanity. But nonetheless, I'm not sure we've seen sentience yet.
Yeah. But crunching that much data, it can almost feel like when we're interacting with it. And back to our previous conversation about it feeling almost like sentience, like almost like an image bearer, and how that's going to cause a lot of confusion, I think, as we move forward.
Yeah.
Something else we talked about, because this does seem like it's just taking off at a meteoric rate, but also we didn't talk last time about the impact of the pandemic and COVID and how that impacted artificial intelligence and technology generally.
Yeah, and we've discussed this before, but I talk about with that Who's Your Leadership series about technology as humanity's accelerant, and it keeps going faster and faster and faster. It turns out that the pandemic may have been an accelerant for technology itself, and in processes to use that technology. An example, and we might get more into this later, is the use of tools for teachers to work with students over networks. And in today's iteration from OpenAI, they're up to what they call it ChatGPT 4.0. Well, 4.0 was embedded in tools from Khan Academy for teachers to interact with students online before it was ever released as ChatGPT 4.0. And there's just some amazing features for a teacher to make work sets, individualized to students based on performance of that student, that you got to think that that's a really good thing. But at the same time, we have all these tools now collectively called Zoom and along with Microsoft Office products that went meteoric in their use for sharing information in work groups and alike, that all of a sudden alleviate the need for some coming together to complete certain processes, people interacting with one another. And so the workplace doesn't mean what it meant to anymore, and we've lost trust. It becomes all about me. It's me, just like social media has taught us how to do, is being more focused on the self rather than, on the team or on the community. And you can expand this to lots of things, but we've seen it real big in the workplace that there's no my parents' generation, you work for one company 35, 40 years, get a gold watch and retire.
Right.
Well, my generation then maybe not so much. And today's generation coming into the workforce, you're nobody if you've worked for the same company for 4 or 5 years. You gotta be on the move. You're a free agent.
And just in church world, all the pastors listening are thinking about COVID lockdowns and many of them pivoting to online streaming through Facebook and other sources. And I have begun to see articles pushing back on that now. And these are not Luddites. They've used the technology, they've used it well, but just second guessing. Well, was it actually really that helpful, or is it helpful moving forward to just let people watch church in their pajamas in the living room when Hebrews 10:25 says a key piece of this is gathering together? And so I think we've all lived that.
Yeah.
There was one other piece of this that
when the kids come running out of the nursery and say, Mom and Dad, so-and-so's family is going to such and such for pasta for lunch. Can we go too? Can we go too? And then you go and that relationship's developed. That's church, right? That's it's continuation of the message that you're getting at the congregation to having the church family continue their life together. That doesn't happen when you...
Right, and even the push of some major companies to pull people back into the office. And so we are seeing some pushback. One other thing I was just going to mention, and we've talked some about Moore's Law, but we see the technology continuing to increase. It's going up at a meteoric rate, but that the infrastructure will be there for this continuing meteoric rate. So would you explain just a little bit of Moore's Law and the fact that the massive computing power you're going to need for this, but the storage is going to be there. That computing power is going to be there. So could you just mention that? That's not going to be a hurdle.
Moore's Law, named for guy that eventually with the Intel named Gordon Moore that made the observation in the 1960s around integrated circuits that the performance of a microchip doubles in its capability for the same price, or conversely, you could get the same performance for half the price every 18 months. And that existed in the 1960s through the 70s, and he projected it would go, well to the year 2000. Well, then it was extended, that projection, to the year 2018, which was kind of a magical year where the technology then, without the limits of the technology, about using silicon out of sand to create integrated circuits, that's oversimplified, would reach its limits. But that's where quantum computing is picked up. What's very interesting, Josh, and maybe too nerdy, but you can also backtrack that clear to 1900 with previous technologies to integrated circuits, that we've been on that same loop. So, if this continues, for, even another, 10 years, then, it's just unfathomable. That the anecdote of, we have more power in that iPhone that we had in the navigation systems used to land the Apollo on the moon with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Well, sure, cute anecdote, but by 1,000,000 times.
Wow.
1,000,000 times we have that power. So,
it shows the courage of those early astronauts for sure.
So instead of, in the previous podcast, we talked about, and I checked out in my notes here, it was 1.2 billion individuals. There's only so many on the planet, right? Yeah. That have played these video games, and the number of concurrent users is just astronomical.
Wow. Out
here using these tools, all on platforms owned by trillion-dollar companies. So they're not going to let those go. And what's my point there? Shouldn't we be using these technologies to tackle other issues? Yeah. Right? Decoding the genome would certainly be the other extreme, right? But then that gets into all the issues. Certainly, when we use information technology to speed the process of decoding the genome, the God-given genome. Yeah. We can't ever forget that. And then what do we do with that? Well, if we're using it to conduct surgeries in the womb, to prevent certain diseases or certain vulnerabilities to diseases, we can even argue that. But then when we start using it for designer babies, that there's proof that was done in China already, then there's real moral and ethical dilemmas with that. But the most shocking to me is documented in Isaacson's book called The Code Breakers, talking about the people that did all this decoding of the genome. Was a deaf couple in Washington, D.C. that wanted to ensure that their baby would be deaf, because they wanted to be able to parent that baby. And wow, isn't that a goal of all of ours, to want to be able to parent a baby? And wow, that seems maybe going the wrong way. But so these are the. So now, I got way down into a rabbit hole there, but that's how we're going to use all that processing power. Are we going to use it for things like that? Are we going to use it for video games? Or are we going to use it to solve greater yields on crops? How to predict weather better? How to avert crises? How to avert war? These are the problems of the day.
Right, and it's like there's a green light, and we have the vehicles. Yeah. To race down this track, and it doesn't seem like anything's stopping it anytime soon. So how are we going to steer that car is kind of the question. So into a couple of just as practical as we can make it, nuts and bolt type things. How can Christians, how can church leaders use this? Now, I imagine a lot of those listening have used ChatGPT. Maybe they're using it for some of these If there's something we don't mention and you're using it in an innovative way, please, I'd love to hear that. josh@goodcitizen.us. So the first one I just want to mention is Bible translation. And an example I will give is of a church here in Indianapolis. My understanding, and maybe they've added a language since I talked with the pastor, but something like 13 different languages are spoken in that church on Sunday morning. And previously, they would have a transcript, and they were able to use a large language model or another tool to create written transcripts of that pastor's sermon in all 13 of those languages. My understanding now is they have the assistance of an AI, large language model, and it is now live translating that pastor's sermon into all 13 languages. Now, we start getting into questions about this is the reverse of Babel, right?
Right.
So we're kind of removing the problem of Babel because you can have your phone out and you can talk with somebody and it converse in your languages. But that's an amazing example. Another particular challenge that the Christian church has had is just the number of human languages. And how do we get the Word of God, which is a written text, of course, into all of those languages? And what might have taken a lifetime. I mean, you hear those missionary stories where someone spent a whole lifetime on how we can do it in a very short period of time. So if you would jump into anything else on that particular topic.
I'd like to comment on that one specifically, and then we can talk about a couple of other use cases. But so when I keep using ChatGPT 4.0 as the example. That's the current product from OpenAI. That's just needs to be a generic though. When we talk like Coke as a soft drink, when we say Coke, we need to realize there's a bunch of these tools. But in particular, in their recent release, they demonstrated just natural language translation. A woman speaking Italian, and I'm stuck on what the guy was speaking, so maybe it was German, and it's doing real-time translation between the two. Well, that could certainly help for a tourist in a city. But back in our example of losing what it means to be human, in my work life, if you were going to go do work in Japan, then you had to take, it was weeks long course, hours per day, as in 8 to 10, learning culture and language and custom and everything. It wasn't just to go in and be able to say hello and where's the bathroom and what do you want to eat. Yeah. You needed to make that effort because of the cultural implications of working as part of a team, particularly in Japan. Everybody gets up and leaves together. Osakini, I'm sorry, I'm leaving before you are, because you would never leave before the other people are. But if you had a pressing family commitment or a doctor's appointment, you would excuse yourself in that way, and people would understand, right? But so we lose that because that was a huge emotional bank account builder between people, right? Now, so back to your church example and the Bible translation, the process of translating the Bible into a tribal language and learning the cultures and the habits and being perhaps side by side in a village as you go through that process, that had to go a long way to delivering Christianity in and of itself. That this person here
would care enough.
So, but I'm not going to argue against. And by the way, we switched roles here from the last podcast, right?
We did.
So I'm 3 cheers for, and I hope they've added all the languages that's necessary to get through to the different speakers.
But not a replacement for that. I mean, learning a culture, being all things to all men, that AI is not going to fix that, not going to do it for you. So a tool, but not a replacement.
Again, just a tool.
So that was one, and just one that kind of jumps out at me, and we celebrate that. We're now able to bring the scriptures to more and more places more easily. Another one would be sermon prep, and then other forms of of education. Now, I imagine most of the pastors here have kind of run their outline through ChatGPT, or to your point, with Gemini, you have Grok and others. And just said, anything that I might have missed on this particular topic. So that can be helpful, but it does raise the question of there was a church in Germany that used an AI to preach a sermon. So you go down that road and have questions. We'll talk a little bit about Khan Academy. And Khan Academy has So my understanding would be kind of like Google Chrome, and then you put an extension on Google Chrome or your web browser, kind of like a large language model, and then they kind of tacked on
Yeah.
Khan Academy proprietary coding to help kids learn.
Yeah.
And one of the tools that they have is helping with mental health. And so the kid writes in, I'm really anxious about my test, and the response from the Khan Academy's system is basically, well, here's how you deal with that stress. And so you could almost see a spiritual application of that. I mean, what if that particular model was trained in scripture rather than just behavioral mental health or something? I'm not sure that that's a good thing.
Yeah. Right.
I think you do need that interpersonal connection there. But what about Khan Academy? What about forms of education? How is this going to impact education, and where could Christian schools and churches have Sunday schools, right, or small groups? We're in the business of education. So what can we learn here?
Yeah. Of course, we've both been exposed to some of these advances in education, again, through the Hoosier Leadership Series, when we see some of the things that are going on in the education system, but continually hear about the over leverage of the teacher in the classroom and how it drives some of the best teachers from the classroom because of all the other things they're having to deal with in the classroom that don't look very reading, writing, arithmetic like. And I think using some of these tools to develop the personalized lesson plans and one child at a time and stuff like that is just really a no-brainer. And you see it being done as a result of the pandemic, that teachers were exposed to these tools and then continue to use them. One of the most innovative uses I saw of the iPads in the classroom is the teacher that at the end of the class, everything she just taught is in a quick Quizlet, and they answer 10 questions, but their name's not tied to it. It's just they submit the answers so she can evaluate herself on how she got the points across during that lesson, because her goal, of course, was for the students to learn what she's teaching, not to give them a grade. And so the next class might have to start out with a repeat of things that they didn't catch right there in that instant of time. So you could see how using the most advanced version of this, these large language models that take voice as input, putting all that together and creating that on the fly is a good thing.
So wheels are just spinning here. It's the old question of, I had to learn math, and look, you won't always have a calculator with you. And then now everybody has an iPhone. You see the memes about this, but what's the equivalent of that now? That what tasks in more traditional classrooms, which were created to produce workers for the Industrial Revolution. There's been a lot of research on that. What's the doing long math problems or division equivalent now, where if your fourth graders have, in a sense, kind of a personal tutor that knows they like soccer and is able to explain math problems using soccer analogies or something. What's the equivalent of that today? How do we help kids not do things that aren't going to be helpful? And,
sure.
As we head into a new economy.
You've just generated an idea for me to try with one of these models. I'll end up doing it yet tonight, but using soccer, build some story problems that the train leaves Philadelphia and the train leaves Chicago, operating at these different speeds. Where will they intersect? Do that with various.
I should have mentioned lacrosse. Christopher was a lacrosse teacher, very coach, very successful. I wanted to share one example because it's like, all right, what is the quality of these large language models? And we talked a little about training model poisoning, and is this helpful to kids? So here was the question, and it's as if you're talking to George Washington. And one thought was, well, could you create models like this where you're having a conversation with David or Abraham or something? Right. But so the question was posed to the large language model, about George Washington and the paradox in between writing, supporting the American Revolution based on the Declaration of Independence, but still owning slaves. And so here was the response from this large language model. It seems you're interested in the paradox of the Enlightenment ideals and the institution of slavery. This is a complex issue, indeed. It's true that the paradox of liberty and enslavement was a matter of great contention in my time. And so it's speaking as if it is George Washington. Yeah. We, the Founding Fathers, were greatly influenced by Enlightenment ideals, which emphasize individual liberty and equality. Yet the institution of slavery was deeply entrenched in our society, particularly in the southern colonies where I myself resided. As for my personal stance, I was a slave owner, a fact that I grappled with throughout my life. I was not blind to the contradiction between the principles of freedom we fought over and the reality of human bondage. Over time, my views evolved, and upon my death, I made provisions in my will to free all the slaves I owned. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, that's a very complex topic, and it was able to pull it together.
Yeah.
So definitely lots of opportunities there.
Yeah.
For teaching. You introduced me to a concept of digital twinning. Will you explain a little bit about that, and then the question of what are the limits of that? So
yeah. So first of all, this is a term that can mean different things to different people, but we're going to use it in the large language model context. And let's take a pastor. Okay, so let's take the pastor that perhaps has delivered 200 sermons in their time. Okay, and we take the digital version of all those sermons and put them into their own vertical of a large language model training base. Okay, so only the pastor has access to his own version, but then he combines that query with a model that includes not only the NIV translation of the Bible, but the King James version and others. Okay, and wants to write a sermon on. He's teaching from Matthew, and there's an issue in the community dealing with violence and stealing, and bringing all that together. The pastor's past sermons, perhaps throw in the pastor's emails or texts as input. So you're only dealing with the pastor and his digital twin, everything that he's ever done, because he can't remember the context of all that. Bring in the Bible that's accessible by everyone, and help start those sermon notes, that sermon outline, to addressing the community's big issue next Sunday, right? Is that wrong? Here we go, right?
Yeah.
Because I haven't said put in all of the sermons of the greatest pastor ever, or you give me all the Billy Graham sermons. I've said just keep it local, the digital twin. And then of course that can bleed into other things, but keeping it at that just seems like the pastor that diligently goes through all of his files every time he's preached from Matthew and other related things on this kind of violence in the community, to bring all of his points together to then bring it to current. And so it's just another tool, right, of expediting the process of bringing that together so he can focus on the message rather than the process of putting the message together. Because isn't that the end goal? Right. To motivate the... Yeah, go.
Yeah. So it's fascinating.
I'm just
and I do think
the protagonist there.
Right. If you just go to ChatGPT, like write me a message of, I just preached Acts 18.
Yeah.
Just write me a message of Acts 18, and you just take that and as a kind of a crutch, and you're busy. And I would see an issue there. I think the kind of general received wisdom at the moment is to just say, hey, I want to cite the fact that I did in fact use one of these large language models as a part of my sermon prep. It's just it's like you're giving credit to another pastor that you use maybe his outline. But certainly there have been times I'm preaching on something, I look back, I preached on that 3 or 4 years ago, and I just completely forgot about it. I moved on. And so I'm going to recycle that but I'm still going to pray, ask the Holy Spirit for wisdom and guidance. So I think that particular aspect of it, you've kind of cordoned off. You've got your digital twin, and you're just using your own notes. I don't foresee that as an issue.
Yeah. And just to point out the obviously wrong, write me a sermon from Matthew on dealing with this violence issue in my community, and then standing and delivering it. That's wrong. That's back to the example you gave in the last podcast about the teacher not teaching the child about copying is not
right, and
not being a creator and being like God created you to be.
And, for the record, don't see AI as another teaching pastor at your church. I think God's called us as human beings to lead folks. But
some interesting aside, though, there are all kinds of consulting teams out there that have AIs as a member of the consulting team, reminding them of where that's been done before or finding elsewhere within the global enterprise where that problem's already been worked on and bringing it to bear. And, increasing productivity with some astonishing rates. I say that because that's my background, so I know that. But because I followed that, and it's pretty crazy. And certainly, you can't argue in the name of the profitability of that company or delivering quality to their client that they've been using those tools just like they use a phone or an email, right? So,
I'm just thinking about a conversation about the qualifications of a pastor. Does that person have to be alive or sentient? And so I think that probably applies here. This brings me back to something that Christopher introduced me to that I lost a good bit of sleep over. And it wasn't a digital twin, but just asked, I think it was ChatGPT, speak about the sanctity of life in the voice of Josh Hirschberger.
Yeah.
And it came back and shared, a lot of what I would have said. And just thinking about, enough content, I guess, out on the internet at this point that it had crawled through and pulled it. So,
the fact that our eyes were bugging out of our heads when we did that as a trial was due to the fact that it didn't come back and say, who's Josh Hirschberger? It knew of which we spoke, right? The algorithm knew of which we spoke, that there's only so many Josh Hirschbergers out there, and it knew that be interested in the one that's
an advocate.
An advocate for life.
And that's what I lost sleep over. The AI knows me. Right. And so, all right. So we've talked a little bit about sermon prep.
IBM
other
knows
forms.
that we're in this room right now.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
You won't go on that tangent, but
we're trying to just get through the day at this point without being too scared about it all. I'm trying to keep that Pollyanna view of these things. All right. So we've talked a little bit about Bible translation, sermon prep, other forms of education. Can we lean into this as a tool? Another one certainly that I think we can all be grateful for would be medical advancement. We've talked a little bit about before, a doctor that's sitting there with the data of all of the heart surgeries that are like this and being able to apply that. But one thing that has come up with a little bit deeper question, and that has to do with digital twinning to the point where you can use it to kind of process grief. Stories of folks kind of compiling, you think about when mom or dad or grandma and grandpa passes and you compile all of their notes and all of that, and that's something you find helpful.
Including their voice.
Yeah.
Right? So when you ask them a question, I wonder what my mom would say about this, and hear it in her voice, right?
Yeah.
That's
the question. And I know folks that have found some
solace
consolation
in that.
there. I think perhaps the part that would trouble me is if you're creating a hominified, robot that's copying the voice and kind of sitting, and can track a YouTube video, copy the mannerisms, and we're trying to cheat death in a sense, like that. So again, back to the image of God. So just really profound questions there, but certainly the medical advancements, they're going to be huge for us. And something else that I think can be positive would be evangelism. Answers in Genesis is creating my understanding, virtual models. So if you think of a metaverse of some sort, but virtual models of biblical lands and customs.
Right.
And what if you can go up and talk to the Apostle Paul as he's ministering in Corinth, and you get to see Corinth in the background,
Talk about walk through the Bible,
Yes.
right? Walk in the Bible. I think that's just an excellent application. We need to run with that. I mean, the success of the angel network and things like The Chosen and before that, some big movies that have been out there shows that there's a hunger to visualize this. And so you can play both sides of this one too, because that should be that relationship you have with God when reading the scriptures, not weren't designed to be read straight through, and have that experience and have what it means to you versus letting somebody else provide that visualization. You argue both ways, but let me tell you, I'm one that's benefited from watching The Chosen.
That was an example that came to mind.
Yeah, because I dive into, well, now was that for dramatic effect or did that really occur? And lo and behold, I've been reading the Bible for years, and then the New Testament is right there all along, and you're like, oh my goodness, yeah. So that's a good thing, and so I think a metaverse where we go to the Holy Lands during the times of Christ would be extremely educational, right?
Certainly, we've talked a little bit about live translation. That's how do you witness to somebody if they can't understand your language? And so we're almost virtually erasing the effects of Babel. But if it's from an apologetic or evangelistic point of view, that seems to be a huge opportunity. And
I think these are good applications. I think these are good applications.
Going back to medical advancements, any concerns about humans trying to kind of upload their consciousness, and live forever? Even if it's, you've just done that and you got a digital twin sitting out there.
Yeah, that book that I referenced in the last podcast, The Singularity is Nearer. There's chapters, not chapters on this concept, and indeed the author is pursuing it with all of his father's records and everything, and it just raises all kinds of these types of questions, and I think he would take the stance, and so we need to hear it from him, but take the stance that now I'm introducing a whole new topic. Is technology evil? No, technology is evil. There are evil people that use technology, right? It's back to the morals that we developed early on, and that's why we need a revival, because for such a time as this, this might sound like a closing statement, so I'll come back and repeat it. But for such a time as this, we need a revival because the technology is coming at us so fast. We need to reground ourselves in our Christian society on what it means to be human and our values. So these tools get implemented in a fashion that's pleasing to the Lord.
Do you think there's any opportunity, and you mentioned one of your kind of billboard statements was it's 11 p.m. where are your kids' devices?
Yeah.
And maybe where is your device, so you don't have blue light,
like father, like son.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Never
convicted,
more
state convicted here.
Yeah.
But is there some opportunity to use...
The whole family needs to plug them in the, in the room that away from everybody else during the evening. And do you know where all of your children's devices are? Because it's not just the phone. That's the oldest trick in the book.
Will there be some opportunity maybe to have technology, and this sounds counterintuitive, but technology assist in monitoring technology? It's something, now we have screen time that will limit, but, is there some AI can say, hey, your kid visited these sites, like gives you a report or something. So maybe is there opportunity for that?
Yeah. And lots of different levels of that. It already exists, and I think we'll see more and more and more of it as families become aware. That was another good thing that came out of the pandemic, is parents saw the firsthand, because they're home, the children are under the same roof, and they see the way this run amok. And I think some of the positive things that occurred. Well, we all sat around the dinner table, ate together, and then had game night before, resuming other activities type of thing. These are the examples of things that came. Well, I think the exposure to how their children were using the technology or misusing the technology that the schools had required them by to be successful in the classroom, that wasn't really being used for that type of thing. Then all of a sudden it was, because it had to be.
Yeah.
It evolved because of the times we're in. But certainly the technology sabbatical and the parental example. I mean, you can walk into a restaurant and it's not the kids on their phones, it's the parents carrying on their conversation. They're looking everything up and showing pictures that they just took hours ago. No, that's not what we're about. And that's not what living in community means.
So we'll have a few kind of concluding thoughts here, but I thought that would be something good to dig into just a little bit, as we have just a few minutes left. Here you are, technology futurist. As you've discussed your career a little bit of, back in the day at IU, you're thinking, what would this look like? And now to see it all come to fruition, you study these things. You're at the leading edge of it. How do you maintain that balance of, I've got to figure out how to use this technology, but also not let it control me, not let it replace community or affect family?
Thanks, Josh.
Sorry. Let me solve it all for us, please.
So first of all, I need to practice what I preach in this category, but you'll find me on the daily walk and experiencing God's nature, the trips to Colorado, being in community via sport, whether it's I am the person that everybody has to leave their phones in their bag when you're on the golf course. You don't take your phone onto the pickleball court, and stuff like that. Others can't live by that. They become so attached to them. But I enjoy a retired lifestyle, and so I find that some of the most fulfilling moments are when you're away from the phone. I'm trying to think what it was recently. Hiking in Colorado, where there's still places where you can't hear me now. Can you hear me now? You can't hear me. That are out of reach. It was just the most freeing time, because you were in conversation with the people that you were on the trail with for hours at a time, right? And it was very fulfilling and refreshing. And Thoreau wrote about this 160 years ago. Wow. I'm talking about Walden, right? Oh. And technology hadn't evolved near that much. Right. I might be off a little in my timing there, but I think it's the pause that refreshes. It's the technology sabbatical, and just since you asked the personalization of it, one thing I found tremendous enjoyment and fulfillment of in separating from the technology is and a result of the pandemic for me is reading the classics. There's another example of how much more educated it seems we used to be, because I like to read these Penguin classics that have all the footnotes, and you go to the back, and the assumption of the authors of the classics on what the reader knew by other things that they read, because they reference it without referencing it, right? This is just common knowledge. Wow. And that I need to, I'm an educated man, right? And 120, 140 years after some of these things are written, I'm reading all the footnotes to see what they're talking about on some of this stuff. And it's like, wow. So I'm talking about Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, all the British authors and the like. And one can learn a lot by reading those things, values, and how we got to where we are and things.
And you're looking back at the kind of the height of human creativity, what has survived the span of time.
Right.
And we talked about digital twinning to become immortal. Well, that was writing a book for a long time.
Right.
But whatever your version of that is, listener, and for me, there is nothing that compares to real life. And I was having this conversation with a group of students after we went through Genesis. And it's live in the real world. Yeah. Real human relationships, real human community. That is what Scripture speaks to. And why are we so anxious? Why is our mental health is tanking? Why is our physical health tanking? And so I just so appreciate your
so reactionary.
Yes, very healthy. I know this. We're going to be involved. but I'm going to take a healthy break. Because you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
that the engineers have designed these things to consume us.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so we all know that, yet we still fall into the doom
Yeah.
scrolling. So I appreciate your personal example there. So just a couple of points as we finish up. I think you've said a few times, the question was, can we sit this revolution out? I think the answer from you is no.
No. Yeah. Size 20 font, boldface, Helvetica, double underline. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I got it.
Yeah.
I'm a little dull at times. But then just how can Christians positively impact this change? Just maybe any practical thoughts.
Yeah. It's rehashing some of these things we just said. You got to remember what it means to be human, and focus on the family, focus on their development, focus on the friendships that your kids and grandkids are creating. Create those opportunities for the healthy activities that don't involve technology, because too many times we just say, oh, they're always on their phone. No, create the opportunities where they're not, or come up with a storytelling or game playing thing that involves the subliminal use of the technology along with them. I've seen some successes in that, but it's do all those things that we learned in Sunday school, right?
A drum I have been beating a bit with younger generations and really anyone, I think, in the church is we have not been this way before, and we do not have a lot of deep thought and biblical application concerning the image of God vis-a-vis artificial intelligence and what's coming. And so just encouraging members of the next generation, or maybe you're in a season of life where you can do some of this thinking and writing on how do we live faithfully in this moment? How do we advocate for human dignity in a world where humans are commodified and the robots are homnified, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So the other one we talked about a good bit is maybe God's calling some of us into technology fields. Who's going to prevent the training model poisoning? And that's why I appreciate your career in this space.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah. When we go back to all the healthcare debate that occurred in Washington, that was followed by a surge in the number of people from the medical field that ran for office. The statistics were overwhelming in the 2012, 2014, 2016 timeframe, when all the changes to healthcare insurance were occurring. I hope that in this next generation of legislators at every level, local, state, and federal, that there's a technology literacy that understands, what we're done, what we're capable of, and the appropriate harnesses. Now, I'm not saying regulation necessarily, because regulation can thwart the our whatever our is in that sense, local, state, or federal, thwart development, while nefarious characters misusing it run ahead and profit off of it. But so I don't think that was your intent to get into that. But
we
I
need
think
to have better AI.
We need to have better technology literacy in those that are setting policy. And so as good citizens, we can't just sit back and let others do it. We need to be in the room to decide who decides on how these things are. That's not my phrase, right? That's an MIT professor wrote a book on surveillance capitalism. Who decides who decides. And that's those are voters. Those are called voters, right? That we need to make sure that why isn't this a question more often on technology literacy of those that are elected representatives. So I'm not sure if that's where you want to go with that.
That's excellent.
And those that are leading our church. We don't want it to be the tail wagging the dog, but we do need to make sure that we're cognizant of the good uses and amplify those in the way it's deployed in our
that's a good word.
in our faith life.
And one of the things I was reflecting on, we've talked a good bit about the image of God, but I really do think as the Christian church, we have the truth that our world is going to need, and it's only going to be more apparent. The old line from Jonathan Sachs, science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts them together to see what they mean.
Yeah.
So I think we're prepared for a crisis of meaning. I'd love to get your thoughts on this too, but just you've got an individual, maybe it's not the truck driver in your congregation that's going to lose his job next, but a lot of basic manual tasks, or maybe it's the middle level technology tasks that are going to go first. Where, all right, I've worked in this technology field, I've been inputting data, and now an AI has taken my job. What does that do to my identity? I can't find someone to date because people have personal robots that are meeting that. I think we're going to have that crisis of meaning, and the Christian church is going to be there to say, no, you're made in the image of God. You have dignity. So I think we can be ready for that. But any closing thoughts? This has been just so rich, so helpful. We've covered a lot of ground. But any closing thoughts on the church and AI?
Yeah, just reiterating. You've said just a few minutes ago. Don't sit this one out. Make sure there's a literacy going on. I know you can help any of your listeners get contacted with people. I'd be glad to help you in those situations where you see where that'd be effective. But set out. I think we ended the last one with a billboard of take a large language model to lunch today.
Okay.
There's all kinds of subscription-based services, but there's all kinds of free services to get the feel for how they work. The first time you used email or the first time you used AOL, it's kind of doing that all over again. But you'll be surprised, and ask tough questions, right? When you in there to see, and then be discerning of the answer. Never conclude with a new thought, but I'm going to violate that now. That ask tough questions. Don't accept the answer because these large language models, they don't know how to say I don't know. They always come up with an answer. So
Okay.
that's like a new thought to end with. But I'm just saying, like anything, you got to go out and kick the tires, but then question it, because we need to be in the room where it happens. And the it here is the next evolution and acceptance of these tools. So if we're interested in the future for our kids and our grandkids, way back to the starting of episode 1 here, we need to have a richer understanding of how this stuff's rolling out in their lives.
Christopher, I can't thank you enough for taking time, sharing your expertise with us, and we'll probably keep this going as things continue to change. But thank you for using your gifts for the kingdom in this way, and we'll have some links in the show notes to various resources. But thank you again for joining us for this conversation.
Yeah, take it, Josh.